Okay, I'm looking forward to this today. We're going to be very quick, and we've got a lot to go over today. And I'd like to introduce everyone that has joined us here today. I'm Brian Ladd from the Ladd Group at Cascade Sotheby's International Realty, and I've been joined by my colleagues here, Steve LaCrosse and Erin Martin. They're both brokers on the Ladd Group, and we're going to have a little panel discussion as we go through this data today. So thank you for joining us. And we've also got Jamie Griggs, who's our marketing director, extremely talented. She's got this Facebook live streaming on Facebook. And what she will do is she'll follow up at the end and send a link out to all the slides. So if anyone wants to get a copy of these slides, we'll be sending that out, but you can also just reply back to the Zoom invite and you can ask any questions there. But looks like we've got plenty of people up and running, and I'd love to get going today. So here we go. So here we are, beginning of December, and just like where we were at in the very beginning of the pandemic, February, March of 2020, there was a really sense in the market, there was a sense of unease. Where is this going? What is happening? And there was a lot of people that kind of stopped. Buyer stopped, seller stopped, agents stopped, and everyone was looking for direction on where this goes from here. And so we leaned into that heavily, and we dug into the data, and we felt that we understood the data enough to really push out there that we have a massive housing shortage. The economy was going to continue to move. Housing was going to be more important than ever. And we spoke into that void a little bit. And, we were proud of the advice that we were able to give. But once again, we're at one of those points. It feels like there's a little bit of a timeout in the market. We've had this incredible run up in prices. Things are changing. We're kind of unwinding the pandemic. We have another round going on. The mass migration from the cities to the rural areas or the less urban areas like Bend is slowing down. There's some reshuffling in the job market. And once again, I feel like we're at one of those critical junctions where people are trying to understand what's happening and where we go from here. And we think we have some good data, and we'd love a two-way discussion on this today. So once again, if you have any questions, please put those out there. We're going to definitely get to those. So I'm going to do this in two sections. One, I'm going to do a quick hit list of where we stand in the market today, what's happening. And then we're going to go to six of the most common questions that we get from our buyers and sellers and clients right now about what's happening in the real estate market. And hopefully that will address a majority of what you guys have questions about. So let's just talk about let's talk about supply of homes. Supply is continuing to be the major factor that we're dealing with right now. We simply don't have enough homes, and it's going in the wrong direction. So we're down to about 2 months of inventory. What does that mean? That means if no new homes come for sale, we are completely sold out of homes in 2 months. And that's down about 33% year over year. But what's even worse is here's a 5-year chart. And this shows the ebbs and flows of inventory. Every year, we usually get that surplus or the peak of inventory in May, June, July. And then every year, kind of October, November, December, even into January, homes are pulled off the market, less for sale, et cetera. But even taking into seasonality into consideration, we're still at about a third of our normal inventory. This is absolutely the biggest thing that we're dealing with right now. And we've done whole webinars on that. On our resources page, we've got those to try to explain some of the reasons this is such a historical anomaly that we're living through right now. And what was the result of that? Prices, sales prices up, way up. So we're up 27% year over year. That puts the median sales price in Bend just shy of $640,000. That's a shocking number. It's a big number, but it's pretty much in line with what we're seeing in similar markets. When we go to other markets that are these, smaller metropolitan lifestyle areas, Bozeman, Boise, things like that, they all saw appreciation very in line with what we saw this year. And it's refreshing. This has slowed down. Earlier in the year, we were showing price, month over, this year versus this month last year, appreciation upwards of 40%. We at one point we got almost up to 50% year over year. So this is calming a little bit, but 27% year over year price appreciation is still shocking. And what this really leads to is, in my opinion, an affordability and housing crisis in Bend, especially for those of us that are working and those that are providing the services to this town. And these two charts here, this was in our last webinar, but I brought this back up just because it's such a visual, display of what we're dealing with. On the left side here, this shows the amount of homes. This was from a month ago, but this shows the amount of homes that we have for sale within an 8-mile radius. We had 216 on the market at that time. But if we go to $500,000 homes and under, at that point, we had 7. So for a 100,000 person town to have only 7 homes under $500,000 speaks to that affordability issue that we're dealing with here in Bend. And this is a much bigger issue. We've done other webinars on housing affordability and the urban growth boundary, and we're going to get back to that. We actually did a really good one last month with a city council member and the head of housing long-term planning for the city of Bend. And if you need to find that, just send us a note. We'll be happy to send that over to you. What this also results into is that the homes are continuing to sell extremely quickly. The median days on the market right now is 11. So that means it only takes about 11 days to sell a home if it's well priced. And if you look at the history, this once again is about, a third to a fourth of the days that it used to take to sell a home over the last couple of years. And what we didn't see is that traditional rise over last winter, because we sold right through the winter months. There is some encouraging trends. It is trending up. It's taking a little bit longer to sell, which shows a little bit of more balance in the market. But it's still an extremely tight supply market. And with that, I'd like to involve Steve here. We have 6 primary questions that we're going to go over today, and I'd love to have Steve take a crack at the first one.
Yep, absolutely. So this first one, we're going to talk about, our price is going to crash. I think that last slide that we just looked at shows days on market picking up, right? People are seeing that, and I know we're hearing it from buyers that, oh, things are taking longer, that there are more price adjustments, and the expectation might be that there'll be further price adjustments and there'll be a better buying opportunity. Unfortunately, when we look at what the experts are saying, they don't see it that way. And we'll go through this, and then I'll kind of explain where we're coming from and why we believe that's the case. So when we look at these 6, the 6 experts that were polled for this price forecast, we see anywhere from an expectation of 3% to about 7.5% next year. So when you average all of those forecasts, it comes out to about an expectation of about 5% appreciation in the coming year. And the reality of it is, home prices really boils down to supply and demand. It's economics. If supply and demand are out of sync, prices move in the direction to try to stabilize that. We had gone through, Brian had showed some slides on where we stand in terms of supply, how many homes we have on the market, where that sits historically. The other piece of that is demand. And so if we go to this next slide, we can see a little bit of context of where the demand is coming from. And so context matters for purchase demand. The economy is improving. Millennials continue to age into their prime home buying years in large numbers. And so that means there are a lot of people that are in this market that are ready to buy, that weren't maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, but they are now. And this chart shows the various populations, the various generations, how many people are in that population, and kind of where they stand in terms of age range. And when we're looking at that number of millennials, followed by another 86 million Gen Z, we have a lot of buyers in the pipeline. A lot of buyers that are here, that are entering that age, they've made some money, they're ready to act. And so when we combine that very, very high demand with more people entering the market every day with a very low supply, that can only do one thing: that can push prices higher. It could also push more sellers into the market, right? Those sellers come in, supply increases, and that's that equilibrium that we're kind of searching for. That, as we've talked about in the past, when that equilibrium hits, that's where we find a more stable environment. But right now we've just got so much demand and so little inventory that all the experts are calling for continued appreciation.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm going to jump in on this a little bit just because there was a good question. So John put in the Q&A, will the lack of inventory also impact the cost of building new homes? I'm not sure if there's a direct connection between the lack of inventory, but the cost to build new homes, I don't see that slackening up. We have such a lack of buildable, developable land here in Bend. That goes back to the urban growth boundary that has to do with the sewer and water and utility availability for developers to actually put those lots in. It also has to do with the lack of workers that we have in this market that can afford to live here. So the labor cost to build these homes is extremely expensive. The land cost to build these homes is extremely constricted. And the material costs, because of the pandemic, they shut down logging, they shut down sawmills, et cetera, et cetera. Shipping goods is an issue. I mean, Steve, we could tell stories right now about houses being delayed because garage doors are back ordered 9 months, and appliances are stuck in the Panama Canal, and there's every kind of thing you would never expected. But this pandemic related supply constraints from shutting down the economy a year ago are having repercussions. And I don't see, unfortunately, the cost of the new construction going down. And then another question just jumped in, is talked about future lot supply. There are new lots coming on the market, but we've talked about this before. It's in such a small fraction of what's needed to create affordable housing that we are really going to have to address this issue head on. The city's going to have to get after this. They're going to have to continue to provide incentives to put in higher density housing, things like that, because the amount of lots that we have coming on, they brought in, and I hate to be misquoted on this, they brought in just under 1,500 acres in the last urban growth boundary expansion. And that did bring, a fair amount of lots to the table in the coming 10 years. But we've been showing that we're short about 1,500 homes a year for the last 10 years. So we're already in an 8,000 to 10,000 home deficit to create a affordable housing market. And we're going into a time where we have increased demand, increased amount of buyers. So I'm afraid that my phone is now on my computer. But we don't have the lot supply coming on that will match this demand. So unfortunately, I see lots are going to continue to be a problem.
Awesome. So can I just say one more thing? I know we got to move on to the next question, but you were talking about costs. And you were talking about some of those costs going up. And I know Erin and I were just talking about how I think one of the things we hear a lot is concerns about inflation and costs going up and everything's costing more. Talking about buying a house in a time of inflation. I mean, ultimately, inflation is prices are going up. You want your money in something that's also going up, right? That's having money in assets is a good thing when prices are rising. And I think it segues nicely into the discussion of rents and what things look like. Does it make sense to pay these prices? And I'll let you go with that, Brian.
Yeah, so the number two question we're going to talk about is, okay, given the fact that these prices are projected nationwide to continue to increase. And that's not to say that we don't think there could be some corrections or, the appreciation curve is already slowing down. Certain segments of the market may be more susceptible to people going back to urban areas for jobs, things like that. We don't think it's a wholesale bet that everything's going to continue to appreciate at these record numbers. But given the fact that the experts nationwide are saying, hey, this trend's not going anywhere. We have the millennials coming into their peak buying years the next 3 to 5 years. We have a 5 million house shortage in the US. These prices are going to continue to go. If we accept that as fact, then we have to say, am I crazy to pay these prices? And that's a really good question. And let's jump to that. So if we go to the next slide here, I don't like to get too much caught into the rent versus buy numbers, but I want to show you why it still makes sense on paper to buy in this market. I just pulled up a house today on Zillow in Southeast Bend that's for rent at $2,795. This is a 1,600 square foot house, and it's renting right now for $2,795. And so what I did is I came across the board and said, okay, a $545,000 purchase, which is the estimated value on this property with a 20% down payment. And that's high. Some people can't afford 20% down payment. But at a 3.5% interest rate, which is actually even a little bit higher than what we're finding. Our clients have been getting interest rates in the low threes lately. But at 3.5%, that monthly payment, including principal and interest and taxes and insurance, was $2,700 a month. And obviously you need to put in maintenance and things like that into the buy equation, but then there's tax benefits and et cetera. But if we just look at PITI of a purchase versus rent, they're still about the same. And what we've seen in this market, as prices have continued to climb, so has the rent, because we have such a massive shortage in rentals. We are seeing some alleviation to that rent pressure in the apartments, because that demand is being met a little bit. Apartment buildings are going up. But as far as single family homes or townhomes for rent, that there's extreme shortage there that we're continuing to deal with. And then the other thing is that we need to talk about this, and this is what Steve was talking about, is that in inflationary times, where is money best held? And given those projections that we were just looking at before, based on a $350,000 house, which we don't even have in Bend, unfortunately, that showed that at those expectations they had over the next 5 years, it showed that you would gain about $111,000 in increased home equity during that time. So while you have to kind of hold your nose when you look at these purchase prices these days, and so unfortunately some can't, it doesn't matter if you stand on your head and hold your nose, they can't afford it. And that's the issue that we need to deal with. But if someone has the ability to buy and you're making that kind of rent or, rent by decision, there's still some really good data behind, keeping your money in the market. So this is let's get to the next question for sellers that saw this incredible, crazy 2020, 2021, and things have slowed down a little bit here in the fall. They're asking, hey, did I miss my window to sell? Erin, do you want to take a crack at this one?
Sure. I mean, certainly we're sitting down with sellers every single day, and this is their primary first question. And the answer is absolutely not. And it's all, it's very contextual. I think the concern is stemming from kind of the momentum that they felt and saw in the market. But certainly if you put it in the kind of historical context, which is the next slide here, I think we can really see that absolutely it's still a seller's market. It's still the right time to sell. And I think there's a layer of seasonality to it too. So if you look here, and we've talked about inventory a little bit earlier, but essentially a neutral market is 6 to 7 months. So, about 6 months worth of inventory. If no other homes came on the market, it would take 6 months to sell through. Kind of the lowest of the low in Bend was in December of 2010. We were about 12 to 13 months. So it would take over a year to run through all the inventory. Right now, at one point we're 2.2. This shows kind of an average through Keeping Current Matters. It shows an average nationally of being around three months. We're even lower than that at 2.2 average. So really, when you look at this in context of kind of over time and in context of the national market and in general, we are super, we're very, very low. We're in a seller's market, absolutely. So if folks come to us and say, did I miss my window? The answer is no, not historically, not contextually, not, in terms of, other comparable markets, and then also not in our market, just being at 2 months specifically. And I think the biggest fear around that is that they see that my neighbor got 17 offers last spring, and then my other neighbor got 6 offers this kind of this fall. And the answer to that is that in the spring of 2021, we hadn't yet, our prices and our kind of list price and our strategy hadn't yet caught up to the amount of demand that we have. Whereas in the fall, everyone was a little bit wiser, a little bit higher. That 20%, 26% increase was accounted for. And so we just shifted our strategy a little bit. So people were seeing this crazy momentum and these higher prices and these big offers, but really, the market is just evened out in a way that people are now absorbing that and accepting it and starting at a higher level when they do list. So
yeah, and let's talk about that as well, because we did have some sellers and some price reductions this fall. What are those price reductions? Are those appropriately priced homes, or are those kind of the Me Too sellers that were trying to capture a trend and they over extrapolated?
Yeah, you're exactly right. That is 100%, I think, where we're finding. We did find that there was a cap that people were willing to pay, and a cap at which pricing could be extrapolated forward. So oftentimes we would have a seller come to us and say, we're ready to sell our house. My neighbor got X and therefore I should get Y. And the answer, was, it never hurts to try. And really it does. I think pricing accurately is ever more important. I think buyers are very savvy right now, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the days on market are creeping up for the average. It doesn't mean that prices are coming down and we're seeing a change. It just means that we're leveling out to a point where we've recognized how much higher you can go than the market value.
Perfect.
There's two questions here that I think one is definitely relevant, Bend versus Redmond outlook. And I don't want to get too far into that. That could be a whole webinar in itself for sure, but we are seeing more building and more inventory in the new construction in the Redmond market. And so that has shifted things substantially too. So Redmond had, and previously had seen a lot of kind of dated inventory, a little bit older, a little bit larger parcels. And now we're seeing much more build. And it was a couple years behind Bend, of course, when that build all came on. So we're recognizing that the Redmond market itself has gone up, substantively too, 20%, I think, the last time I looked. And so we're seeing that, tail like you would any bedroom community to Bend.
Yeah, and I think that dovetails well into the other question that someone sent in and saying, okay, is there enough undeveloped land, are there undeveloped land opportunities still left? My quick answer is in Bend, in the large tracts, not really. The Polishes, the Haydens, et cetera, went after and chased that. And they've got most of the big tracts tied up. But where I think there is an opportunity is in the smaller redevelopment pieces, because as part of this, when the city went to the state and said, hey, we want all this land and we want to develop, the state came back with the land use laws that we've got in place. And those are, we could, a whole nother webinar right there. They said, we're not going to give you so much, we need you to densify. It goes back to the land use laws from the 1970s, but basically part of that was they gave bonuses for densifying the urban core, places that aren't going to require as much traffic going east to west, west to east, north to south. And so they have lightened up parking restrictions. They've allowed, higher density on single family lots. They've taken away from, they give density bonuses for affordable housing, things like that. And so I think the biggest opportunity for smaller developers is going to go to buy pieces of land in that urban core, especially in that redevelopment district that between 3rd Street and the Parkway. So I think that's the biggest opportunity for developers in Bend. But Redmond, there still is some more traditional single family development opportunities on the market.
And while we've seen that the land has been bought up, a lot of the finished inventory or under construction, available homes haven't yet fully, partly because of infrastructure, right, Brian? Do you want to speak to that just a smidge?
Yeah, so I think, the readily developable land that has water and sewer availability right there, that's been spoken for years, even before the urban growth boundary expansion happened. And the city has been doing a great job. We actually passed a bond last year that addressed the infrastructure, the transportation bond that we passed. There was actually a big article on that today. But yeah, it's going to be tough. So I don't think there's any huge development opportunities right now in Bend, unless you're wanting to redevelop, and then the sky's the limit, literally. They allow up in that central district, and I think to have walkable properties to downtown is going to be really exciting, but that takes some bigger dollars. And then the final question that I think relates to this, and we do need to get on, is saying, hey, if I were to buy an investment property in Bend, which quadrant would you recommend buying? My quick answer would be any of them. But what I've found is that workforce housing is the most readily sought type of property. And I would think that the price points in the Northeast or Southeast would probably provide that housing best, not only for you as the landlord, but as the tenants. I think that's the property that's most in demand. You'll have the lowest amount of free vacancy in, and that's where I would place, my dollars for that.
And certainly the Murphy Road extension, the new Alpenglow Park, Southeast, the center of gravity is shifting a little more that way than it has in the past 2 decades for sure.
Yeah. And so Erin, why don't you follow up on this and just going straight into this question number 4?
Yeah, so when the sellers finish asking the question on whether or not they missed the market to sell, they are also wondering, now did I miss the market on the low interest rates on the buy side? And the answer is, it's also contextual. So when you look at kind of 2016, 17, 18, even 19, which was, kind of fairly level toward the end of it, you see that absolutely not in context. We may have missed maybe the 2.9 crazy numbers, but we also saw them creep back down last week. So you just never know where things are going to end up. The expectation is that they are going to start to go up, in Q3 really is where we see the substantive gains this year. But when you're putting it in context of the overall, landscape, you're looking still in numbers in the 3%. And I think when you think about it, and back in the 80s, your parents would buy one for 18% interest rate. It's absolutely still an excellent time to do it. And especially when you put it in the context of rent versus buy and the various things, the buying power that you have at this low interest rate, I think, the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah, because we need to put it in so many people, we've done discussions about this. So many people think about only the purchase price, but when you actually look at it, often the purchase price is the minority part of your whole equation of ownership. That, if the average ownership is 10 years, if you look at the amount of interest paid in that 10 years, it can be equal or greater to the actual purchase price. So when you start looking at that and you start saying, hey, I can lock up a 3.5% money in an inflationary world, it starts to look like a really nice hedge against the overall economy, not just a wise, buy decision. So I think, it's going to change a little bit as interest rates go to 5-6%. If they get back to that point, this whole metric changes. But for right now, it's still in play. And let's get to that, Steve. And Steve, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So will higher mortgage rates bring sales price down? In general, you just saw that we are expecting rates to rise a little bit. I think it's important to point out that not everything is speaking to the same result. There are scenarios out there, and this Case-Shiller home price index chart shows year-over-year appreciation and what it could look like if rates had jumped to 4% or higher. And they have an estimate out there that the housing market could contract about 2.5% in December of 2022 if interest rates were to go up to that level. And so it's not always rosy. It's not always a clear cut. This is where it's going to go, and this is what the result will be. And I do think it's important, before we go on to the next slide, I do think it's important. It's an important point to bring out that although that contraction might take place if interest rates spike, let's say they go to 4% or 5%, and we have that contraction a year from now, this is where that whole conversation, and the reason we want to sit down and want to talk to people, is because there's a lot more to just price, right? There's a year's worth of time in there. And what does the home mean? And what is buying now and getting in? And there's a lot to it outside of just that price factor. And so we can't just have this blanket answer for everything that says, yeah, prices are going to go here, interest rates are going to go there. We want to have the whole discussion. Is now the time to sell? Well, maybe. Is now the time to buy? Maybe. Let's find out what all of your goals are and where everything's at. And then this takes us to mortgage rates and what they do for sale prices. When you look at it, and we had gone through something similar with recessions, people always think that prices go down during recessions. And we showed a chart that was very similar that shows that actually the majority of the time over the last 3-4 decades, that's not the case. And we see that again here. 4 of the last 5 times that mortgage rates have gone up, prices have actually continued to go up during that same stretch. And so it's just another reminder that things could go either way, but in general, that misperception that if rates go up, prices have to go down, that's not what the data shows. So I think it's a great chart to have, and allows a little bit of perspective of what's actually happened over the last 40 years.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Erin, do you want to take a crack at this number 6 question about should I wait until the spring to buy or sell?
Yeah, so I think it's good to kind of splice this one into 3 parts, because the first question is, should I wait to buy? The second is, should I wait to sell? And then the other layer to that is, when is spring? So I think, on the first kind of layer here, we see that buyers right now, there are opportunities with when you have some motivated sellers and you're getting toward the tail end of the season. They may have been on the market for a little while at a overpriced or at a price that wasn't palatable. That we are seeing some buyers, get some great opportunities right now. On the flip side, though, we're also seeing really great opportunity for some sellers who are coming in fresh on the market this time of year because of the low inventory. So the buyers right now are highly motivated if they're still looking this time of year, and they are probably familiar with every ounce of inventory there is out there. So a new home on the market this time of year usually kind of gets a fresh verve of energy, and people are pouncing on it pretty aggressively. And so we're seeing opportunity on both sides. It's always a unique scenario, and I think strategically choosing the way that you approach it is really important. The other layer to that is, though, that we often think of spring incorrectly. So a lot of sellers and even buyers, mostly sellers, start to think of, spring as April, May, June. They want to wait till their home, their landscape is green, and they want to wait till, they feel like the buyers are out there. When in fact, what we see year over year is that Q1 is when buyers are starting. There's kind of a New Year's resolution, a new lease on life kind of concept and approach here that we just see, all the time. So really the buyers are out there in January, February, March, typically because we see the closings and the kind of uptick in, both inventory and closings starting in Q2. We believe that that's when the buyers have started looking, and that's just not accurate. So if there is an opportunity for a seller out there, I think certainly it is during the early winter months. Seasonality and weather, are part of this as well. But typically, even a snowstorm, we'll see people out there in January aggressively looking in a time when we wouldn't have expected it. There's another layer to this, though, Brian, that I think is really important, and it's the pent-up demand. Do you want to kind of dig in on that a little bit?
Yeah, so you're right. I think most people bring their homes to the market too late because, a lot of times people are bringing them to the market in the months where buyer activity is already slowing. And we're dealing with the historical anomaly right now of almost no homes for sale. So what a time to be a seller, right? You just need to be appropriately priced. But that said, that dovetails into this next trend that Erin was talking about this winter and what we're seeing. So we're actually starting to see inventory increase here at the end of this year, and it's slight and it's kind of hard to notice, but that's something that we're usually following this time of year. And what this really has to do with is something that's bigger. So Realtor.com put out a survey of saying, okay, sellers that are planning on listing in the next 6 months, how many are going to sell earlier this year, and are they going to sell in the winter? And 65% of the people plan to list this winter. This is something we've never seen before. And 93% have already taken steps to get that going. And so here's a quote that I think really sums it up well. And it says, this pandemic has delayed plans for many Americans and homeowners looking to move on to the next stage of their life. Okay. And homeowners looking to move on to the next stage of their life are no exception. Recent survey data suggests that the majority of prospective sellers are actively preparing to enter the market this winter. And what this really goes down to is we have a pent-up demand of sellers right now. While we have a shortage of houses, we've had a lot of people in their homes longer than normal. And I feel that there's going to be a little bit of unwinding here as this pandemic comes to an end. If you look from 1985 all the way up until about 2008, the average, and excuse that graph was an average, but it shows that the average length that people spent in their homes was about 6 years. From 2010 all the way to 2020, we got closer to 9-10 years. Some of those years of how long people have been in their homes. And just as things change when this pandemic wound up, as it winds down, I feel that we're going to see a similar reshuffling, and a lot of people are kind of ready to get on with life. So I think that we're going to see more homes come on the market this winter than we're used to. And I think it's great for both sides. Buyers need the homes to sell, and sellers, what a great time to put your home in best light when there's so few homes on the market. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think it's important to point out that we don't believe that that results in lower pricing. So we just, even though the demand will be up, the bit will be fulfilled, we don't expect that that creates a drastic down, turn. Brian, do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, so yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't think we've got a flood of homes hitting the market. I think we are finally having, this is kind of an optimistic want as much as anything, but we're going to see some inventory hit the market. I think as this pandemic winds down, anecdotally, there's a lot of people that have been in Bend a long time, and Bend is no longer the Bend that they grew up in. As their life needs change, as they don't want to shovel snow, as they want to get on with things, as their home appreciated to the point where they can downsize and move to a sunnier, warmer market. I think there's going to be some turnover as this pandemic comes to an end, and there's going to be a little bit of a shift in this town. So I think we're going to see some inventory come on, but when we're talking the inventory levels we have right now, we would need to have 5 times the amount of homes that we have right now to create a market that would create downward pressure on those prices. So unfortunately, I just don't see enough inventory to pull down these prices at this point. And with that, if anyone else has any questions, I'd love to hear them. I see one more here, and then I'll let Steve and Erin go with any parting thoughts, but I appreciate everyone for hanging with us today. One of the questions that was put out here saying is, what do you think about taking a 2,500 square foot home, dividing it into 2 rental spaces, and put in a kitchen and make the other side a rental? My answer is hallelujah. We need housing so bad. I think that would be an incredibly wise investment. And talk to your CPA about it. There's all kinds of great things you can do. You can then depreciate it as an investment property. And the depreciation often offsets the income that you make on it. So it's kind of tax-free income. There's so many great things with that. So anytime you can add a door, an apartment, an ADU, a second unit in this market, I think I would fully support that. And the city's in full support of that. They're removing additional off-street parking restrictions to encourage those ADUs, those accessory dwelling units. So I'm all about that. And then the last one here says, Bill, thanks for throwing that in, says, so I talk about changes as the pandemic ends. What happens with a new surge? So here we go. We're on from Delta. What is the new one? Omicron? It's tough to say. But what we found is that the last surge, all I can talk about is in February of 2020, we had to look long and hard in the mirror and said, are we biased about thinking that 2020 is going to be a huge year in real estate? The world shut down. There's stay-at-home orders. And it was the biggest run on real estate Bend has ever seen. And so my gut feel is that if there is another pandemic, if there's another wave, it's probably going to be more of the same. And the people that it affected most are those in the urban cores. When we're locked down in Bend, it's kind of bad. When you're locked down in an apartment in San Francisco and Seattle, that's bad. And those people are leaving, come to Bend. So if I had to make any prediction what would happen with another surge, frankly, it's going to drive more buyers to our market and more pressure on our housing stock. Erin, Steve, would you agree with that?
Well, certainly what we see as a phenomenon is the Zoom culture. And as I think it may delay folks having to go back to the office. And if that were the case, then of course we see more of the same as a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say, another surge probably doesn't present that same upside potential that we saw a year and a half ago, right? There were so many people. This was so new. Everybody made the jump. I'm out of here. I want to go somewhere else. A lot of those people have made the move. A new surge is going to maybe get some more people off the fence, but we don't see it shooting things up another 15, 20, 25, 30%. That's kind of where we go with that. Upward pressure we believe will remain, but it just won't. We don't think that it will be quite as dramatic as what we have seen.
Wonderful. And with that, I'm going to end this webinar. Everyone, thank you for hanging with us. We still have 50 people hanging even just in our Zoom meeting right now. So if you have any questions, please just respond to that Zoom invite. We'll be happy to reach out to you directly. Once again, we're the Lad Group of Cascade Sotheby's, and we have a full history of all these webinars that we've done on our resources page there if you have any questions. We love the data and we love having these conversations with the public and our clients. So thank you. Have a great evening. The sun is setting. I'm looking out here and I'm going to go try to sneak a walk in before it gets too dark. So cheers.